Well, we're in part 6 of this series, Unshakable, and the journey we've been on together is, well, how do we have unwavering faith as we live in uncertain times? And the last few weeks, we all know uncertainty has just skyrocketed, hasn't it? I mean, we feel it everywhere. And we've been, navigating, journey through the story, the book of Daniel. And before we'll just jump into where we're going to go today specifically, I wanted to share with you an image that kind of helps frame the entire book of Daniel. I mean, visually, this is what it looks like. Now, this image, this visual depiction of Daniel is informed by a couple things. One is informed by the languages. And yes, I just said languages plural. You see, Daniel is actually originally was written in 2 different languages. Chapters 1 and 8 through 12 was written in Hebrew, which the vast majority of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. But chapters 2 through 7 were actually written in Aramaic. Now, Hebrew and Aramaic, they're both ancient Semitic languages. Think about it this way. They're kind of cousin languages. Very different, but yet similar in nature. And Aramaic was the language that Jesus and the other disciples would have spoken. That was their kind of just normal, everyday language. It was a Galilean dialect of Aramaic, but it was still Aramaic. I mean, they would have also spoken Hebrew and a little Greek, but Aramaic for Jesus and the disciples and the other people living during that period of time would have been Aramaic. And so the author shifts right in the middle, chapters 2 through 7, to Aramaic. Again, it helps to form this visual image of the book of Daniel. Now, something else very interesting happens. There's a rhythm for chapters 1 through 6, and then also for 7 through 12 that we have to pay attention to. You see, chapters 1, 3, and 6 are all about these moments of life where uncertainty soars, and what we learn in this series, right? Right behind uncertainty is fear. When their world got flipped upside down, when their faith was tested. That's chapters 1, 3, and 6. Now, chapters 4 and 5 have to do with 2 separate kings, King Nebuchadnezzar and King Belshazzar, and these visions they have, and it's all about pride and were they going to humble themselves. Nebuchadnezzar humbled himself. We see that in chapter 4. But Belshazzar in chapter 5 doesn't. And that night he dies. The Medo-Persian Empire comes in and Babylon ceases to exist. Then chapters 2 and 7 connect together. Remember chapter 2. We looked at this in part 2 of this series. That King Nebuchadnezzar has this dream and it's this massive statue, and Daniel looks at Nebuchadnezzar and like, you're the head of gold on this statue, and then the rest of the statue is the different empires. Well, now in chapter 7, and we're going to look at part of 7 today, Daniel has a dream, and these 2 dreams, chapter 2 and chapter 7, King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, these dreams connect together. Now, something very specific happens in chapter 7. There's a bridge that gets connected from chapter 7 to chapters 8 through 12. Not only does the language shift, but the style of writing also shifts. You see, chapters 1 through 6 it's history, it's storytelling of these very specific stories that took place. But in chapter 7, all of a sudden, the style of literature shifts. It becomes what's known as apocalyptic literature. And what we discover is this future of future kingdoms or future kingdom. Now, there's a couple thoughts that I want to share with you when it comes to this style of literature, this apocalyptic literature. In our Bible, there's 2 main places where you discover apocalyptic literature. You find it in Revelation. Revelation is one long vision, and Daniel 7 through 12. Now, there's other moments of apocalyptic literature in the Bible. One is when the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, there's this moment where, again, you got to read about it, but there's other moments, but these are the 2 main places where we see this style of literature. And this style of literature is it's filled with imagery, it's poetic, it's illustrative, right? And there's these grand images that you're like, man, that's wild to think about. And then you're like, but what does it mean? Sometimes and maybe this is for you, you've heard this word apocalyptic or the apocalypse, and we think about end times, and we think about, the beast and 666 and demons and the devil and the Antichrist, and there's a lot of fear attached to it, and that's part of it. But what we need to understand is the word apocalypse in the ancient Greek language simply meant to uncover, to reveal. That God has kept hidden or kept secret something that's going to happen in the future, and all of a sudden, he's going to reveal all or a portion of what's to come. And that's what apocalypse means, is God's uncovering, revealing. What he's kept a secret for only him to know, he's finally going to start to reveal some of it. Now, there's another insight I want to share with you, especially when it comes to, apocalyptic literature. Maybe you've heard me or someone else say before that there's close-handed and open-handed theology. I use it a lot because it's a great way when you're having discussions with people to go, what should I hold on to and never let go of, and what's okay to have maybe different perspectives. Let me explain it this way. Close-handed theology would be Jesus, the Son of God. We hold on tightly to that. There's no discussion around it. Jesus is the Son of God. He walked on this earth. He died on a cross, and God raised him from the grave, right? We just hold on to that. If you're like, yeah, Chris, I believe 80% of that, I'm like, there's no open-handed, right? No, we're holding on to that. The Bible is God's inspired word. Like, we hold on to that. God is sovereign, all-knowing, everywhere God, right? We hold on to that. So there's some close-handed theology, but there's also open-handed theology where we're like, there could be different perspectives. And when it comes to apocalyptic literature, most of it, not all, most of it, I would say is more open-handed. Again, because God is revealing, he's uncovering, but we might not be exactly sure all the specifics. Now, today, you're going to see some of it. Some of it is going to be open-handed. We're not sure, especially if you decide to continue studying to chapters 8 through 12, there's many open-handed moments in those chapters. There's going to be a couple closed-handed where it's like, okay, yeah, we know exactly what that image is. We're going to hold on to that. But it's okay to say, there's things in the Bible we're just maybe not sure about. It's okay to say in the Bible that there's some varying perspectives that we should just have a discussion around. And when it comes to apocalyptic literature, I would say you want to find people that have rooted their theology in God's word and are very comfortable with saying, we think we know, or here's a couple options or a couple different perspectives. And it's okay, again, with open-handed theology, to say, here's some perspectives. Let's circle around it. I would also caution you to say, if you're studying someone that thinks they know the exact timeline of, Jesus' return, and they have charts and dates and specifics to the detail, I would just encourage you to say, maybe you need to listen to someone else. Now, I'm okay if they're like, hey, this is what I think, but I don't know for sure, but here's an idea. That's different than I know for sure. And this is what I bring people to. Whenever I hear someone say they know for sure, or they're listening to someone who says they know for sure what the end times is going to look like, I always bring people back to Jesus and say, remember, Jesus was the promised Messiah. The apostles who Jesus handpicked all knew what the Old Testament prophets had said about this promised Messiah. And these apostles that knew what the Old Testament prophets said about this coming Messiah walked with Jesus. And they still got the big details really wrong. In fact, they were looking for a physical king to raise up an army to conquer Rome and that Israel would be a mighty nation again. And that's what they expected Jesus to be. This is why Peter, right, in the garden, you remember this moment? They came to arrest Jesus. Peter takes out a sword, cuts off the soldier's ear. Peter was battle ready. He's like, come on, Jesus, let's go. You're our king. Raise up the army. Let's fight now. It's why they were shocked when Jesus asked for a donkey to ride into Jerusalem, not a mighty war horse. And it's why all of them were locked up in a room after he was crucified. And they were thinking to themselves, now what? We didn't expect him to die. You see, they were with Jesus. And they got that he was the Messiah right. But they got all the other details wrong. And so my encouragement for you is we should read the book of Revelation. We should. Actually, the first part of Revelation says there's a blessing that comes with those who read it. So you should. You should study it. You should have different perspectives. But remember also right next to that line that we get a blessing when we read Revelation. Read that. Revelation chapter 1, the first 3 verses, right? But right after that blessing line, you know what else it says? For the time is near. And Revelation was written some 2,000 years ago. So, let's hold on to the things that we must hold on to. In some of these other parts of the Bible, be okay with just saying, I'm going to hold it with open hands and have great discussions and learn from other perspectives. And one day, we're all going to be in heaven looking at God going, oh, I now get what you were saying in Daniel chapter 8 or 12 or Revelation chapter 13. I now get it. I see it now. Now, I mentioned that we're going to end today in chapter 7. Actually, we're just going to look at a portion of chapter 7. But I want to encourage you to study more of the rest of the book of Daniel. I want you to study more about this apocalyptic literature. And one of my go-to places I always go to is a place called the Bible Project. The Bible Project, I tell you, they are theologically sound, grounded. They have so many great tools. In fact, they have a Bible overview for every book of the Bible. Before I kind of start to preach on a book of the Bible, I go to the Bible Project myself. In fact, this is the one for Daniel. It's amazing. It's visual. These are short videos, maybe 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. And they give such an incredible snapshot to every book of the Bible. In fact, you might be looking at this overview, this snapshot right now, and thinking to what I just showed you in the first few minutes of part 6 here, and you're like, oh, I kind of see it. Yeah, this is what I study from. It's one of the main resources. And let me point out something to you. If you go and watch this overview of Daniel, you'll get to chapters 8, 9, 10 through 12, and all of a sudden in this bottom corner, you'll kind of see a scroll, if you can kind of see that. And what I appreciate of what they've done at the Bible Project is there on that scroll, they're like, here's 3 different perspectives of this apocalyptic literature. It might be one of them, might be 2 of them, might be all 3 of those perspectives. We're not sure. And what they're saying is there's close-handed and there's open-handed. So I want to encourage you to study the rest of the book. I want to encourage you to go to the Bible Project and look at all the resources. Again, it's so helpful as you study the Bible. And so I've put several specific links at tcconline.tv/unshakable, or you can just go to thebibleproject.com and you can just search Daniel. You can search apocalyptic literature, and you can start, again, great resources to help you grow and learn and stretch and have different perspectives when it comes to, the entire Bible. Now, let's jump back to this snapshot, this image of Daniel. I mentioned we're going to be in chapter 7 today. And chapter 7 is the most important chapter of all of the book of Daniel. And some scholars actually have said that chapter 7 of Daniel is the most important chapter of the entire Old Testament. And that will make sense as we jump into Daniel chapter 7, verse 1 right here. What we're told is in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Now, if you remember, at the end of chapter 5, Belshazzar dies, right? He has this vision. He's told to humble himself. He doesn't, and he's killed. And the Medo-Persian Empire comes in. So chapter 7 actually now kind of overlays to chapter 5. So we're kind of going back a little bit into history. And what we're told is that in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, a vision passed through his mind. Remember, apocalyptic literature is about uncovering, revealing something that God has kept secret to himself. And now he's ready to reveal part of it, all of it, a portion of it. So Daniel has this dream, this vision that passed through his mind as he was lying on bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Now, the word substance means summary. So think about this, that it's like bullet point. It's not all of it, but it's the main point that maybe he couldn't write it down fast enough, or maybe, just maybe, God was like, these are the things I want you to write down because I want people to remember for generations to come. And then, all of a sudden, chapter 7 shifts to the first person. And we're told, Daniel said, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven. Now, this image of the four winds, and remember, apocalyptic literature is full of imagery. It's full of poetic words to describe this divine, spiritual, upcoming future that God's going to reveal. And he says he sees these four winds. This is the image. Think about like a compass, north, south, east, and west. And he's like, from all directions, they were coming, churning up the great sea. The image of a sea throughout, especially the Old Testament, has to do with violence and chaos and disorder. It gets all connected back to Genesis 1 and creation. In fact, apocalyptic literature pulls a lot from that time where God took the disorder, he took the chaos, he took the darkness and brought order to it, and brought light to it, and created out of it. And so the idea of this great sea is violence and turbulent. He says it was churning up the great sea. Four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. And then Daniel's going to see very specifically these four great beasts, and he's going to describe them. He said the first was like a lion. Now remember, chapter 7, in our image of the entire book of Daniel, chapter 2 and chapter 7 are connected together. Chapter 2, we looked at it in part 2. That was King Nebuchadnezzar having this dream of this massive statue. Daniel looks at Nebuchadnezzar and says, you are the golden head of the statue. And every other part of the statue represents another empire to come. So again, the more you understand chapter 2, it connects with chapter 7 and vice versa. And so he's seeing that the first beast was like a lion. And this is an image of Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar. It had the wings of an eagle. I watched until his wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground. Now, this starts to get connected back to chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar had another vision. This was a vision where Daniel's like, you better humble yourself. Remember that part of chapter 4 when a year later, Nebuchadnezzar's up on his palace. He's looking about how great everything was because he was so good. He was so powerful. It was all his. And immediately he went insane. And he lived as a beast with the beasts for 7 years until he humbled himself, until he lifted his eyes. And so what Daniel's seeing, again, this all gets connected to chapter 2 and then chapter 4. Because his wings were torn off and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. And the mind of a human was given to it. That was when his insanity was taken away and he became sane again. Why? Because he humbled himself. He lifted his eyes and worshiped the one true God. And there before me, Daniel tells us, was a second beast, which looked like a bear. Now, this is the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, this is before, right? I mean, he's in the time of Belshazzar. It was Belshazzar that was killed, and then the Medo-Persian Empire marched in. And he sees this bear, this mighty, strong bear. It was raised up on one of its sides and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. Now, Scholars connect this to the Medo-Persian Empire that came in. They conquered Babylon, they conquered the Lydian Empire, and Egypt, these three major empires. So this is kind of, again, this image to describe what's to come. 3 ribs in his mouth, between his teeth, it was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. And after I looked, there was before me another beast. This is the third beast. One that looked like a leopard. Now, leopards, right, are strong, powerful, and fast. And so this vision is of, well, this great general, this great leader, Alexander the Great. In 10 short years, he conquered the Persian Empire and all the empires connected. I mean, what Alexander did with power, strength, and speed. He's like a leopard. And on his back, he had 4 wings like those of a bird. And this beast had 4 heads. And it was given authority to rule. Now, what's interesting is after Alexander the Great dies, the kingdom that he had built was broken up into 4 separate kingdoms with 4 separate rulers that had 4 separate authorities. After that, we're told that in Daniel's vision at night, he looked, and there before me, he says, was a 4th beast. Now this is Rome. And listen to him describe. Terrible, or terrifying, frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims. It trampled underfoot whatever was left. Think about the Roman army. I mean, this is the image of the Roman army. In fact, Rome built roads so they could quickly move their armies to whether to crush rebellions in different territories or conquer new lands. The Roman army. I mean, this is the image. It was different from all the other former beasts. And it had 10 horns. Now, this image of a horn represents power. And most normal beasts, right, have 2 horns. I mean, usually. And in this dream, Daniel goes, but this one, Rome, had 10. It had 5x the strength, 5x the power. But he wasn't done. He says, while I was thinking about the horns, right? He's trying to process all of this. I mean, he's seen 4 beasts, and he's just processed this image that he's being given. And he's processing, he's thinking about the horns, and then there before me, he goes, I see this, another horn, a little one. Now, we know is what he's seen is what we know as the Antichrist. And he goes, this little horn, which came up among them. This is a phrase of him saying this little horn didn't remain little. It grew big. It came up amongst these other horns. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted. This is a violent overthrowing before it. And this horn had eyes. Listen to him describe the Antichrist. Eyes like the eyes of a human being. Eyes had everything to do with, again, him seeing this human-esque-like figure, but he knew it wasn't quite human. Eyes represented wisdom and intelligence as well. And so this Antichrist was extremely smart, wise, intelligent. And then he describes, he goes, and a mouth that spoke boastfully, that this Antichrist, this little horn that grew up, used its words masterfully to position and to conquer and to overthrow and to shove. That this is someone you don't want to mess with. And then Daniel goes, as I looked. Now, Remember, Daniel has no idea about Rome or Greece or even the Medo-Persian Empire. He wasn't using words like the Antichrist, but we have the vantage point, again, of, reading through Revelation, this other apocalyptic literature. There's this verse in Thessalonians that talks about this person of lawlessness. We have these clues throughout the Bible that we can start putting together an image, a framework of what God is uncovering, what God is revealing. But this is the most important part. He goes, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. All of a sudden, God enters in, right? He sees these horrifying pictures of beasts, empires, this image of the Antichrist, and all of a sudden, God enters in, and he sits down on his throne, this image of his judgment, his authority, his sovereign will. He sits down in his seat. His clothing, Daniel tells us, was as white as snow. This is an image of moral purity, his holiness. His hair on his head was white as wool. This is an image of his wisdom. His throne was flaming with fire. This is the image of his judgment. And his wheels were all ablaze. This is the image of his wrath. A river of fire was flowing, coming from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. And then I continued to watch, Daniel says, because the boastful words, the horn was speaking. This Antichrist kept speaking, kept running his mouth. I kept looking until the beast was slain. His body was destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. Think about that. They had no authority, but they continue to live. Think about Greece today. It's basically a museum. Think about Rome today. It's basically a museum of the past with no authority, with no power. And in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. Now let's stop there, because Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, what we just looked at, is the most quoted verse of Daniel in all of the New Testament. In fact, Jesus, he was standing before the Sanhedrin, before he was crucified. And he actually quotes Daniel chapter 7, verse 13, applies it to himself. And after he's done quoting those words, you know what happens? The high priest tears his clothes, looks at Jesus, and calls him a blasphemer. He was so appalled because the high priest and the rest of the Sanhedrin, the rest of the Jewish religious leaders, they all knew the book of Daniel. And they all knew Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. And Jesus applied it to himself. And he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. And all nations of people of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that he will not pass away. And his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Think about that moment for Daniel. Now, last week in part 5, I shared with you kind of this little snapshot of where we've gone on this journey through the book of Daniel. And I shared with all of you something so important and amazing happens right here. And I said we get to it today in part 6. You see, chapter 7 reveals, or God reveals to us, one of the greatest messages of hope ever. And he goes, my kingdom is going to last forever, that the Son of Man will be seated next to me, that all other kingdoms, all other emperors, all other kings, all other rulers, all other presidents are going to come and go, and one day my Son, the risen King Jesus, will establish my kingdom for now and forevermore. It's this image of hope. No matter how uncertain life gets, we have hope. And if you're a Christ follower, I just want you to know, you have hope because you know the end of the story. You have hope because you know that Jesus, the risen King Jesus, is here for now and forevermore. You know the end of the story. You have hope. Why? Because God says, hey, I'm going to bring back order to this broken, chaotic world that's sin fractured. We have hope because we know what's to come. We have hope. We have hope. Are you living with hope? Are you holding on to hope? Are you energized and fueled by hope? Here's what we all know. A few days from now, we have an opportunity to vote. I mean, we've been living in a very chaotic, fear-inducing, uncertain time. You can't ignore all the ads that are just pumping fear, pumping fear, pumping fear. Uncertainty swirls, it feels like, at every day with a new news report that comes out. And I've said very clearly, you should vote. We live in such a great country, a country where we can vote, a country where it matters when we vote. Like, we should vote, and we should be proud to vote. I can't wait to vote. I can't encourage you enough. But this is what I want you to hold on to. It's not the vote. I want you to hold on to hope because you know the end of the story. I want you to hold on to hope that God says one day his kingdom is going to be established forevermore and that Jesus will be sitting on his throne, and all of the unrest and all of the uncertainty and all of the chaos, God is going to make all things new again, just like he originally created back in the book of Genesis chapter 1 and 2, right? That all of his creation is going to come back and be restored. I want you to hold on to trust a God who is for you and with you. I want you to hold on to the moment like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did when they looked at the king and says, our God is able to, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship anyone else. Our hope, our trust, our worship is to our sovereign, loving God. I want you to trust God, that he is at work, that he is moving. You might not understand it. I might not understand it. I might not like it. You might not like it. It doesn't matter. But trust that God is on the move, and he's called us to move with him. Have patience. I think about the book of Revelation. There's a blessing, and it says the time is near, and 2,000 years has clicked by. You see, God is a patient God. Why? Because he's drawing all people to him. He wants a relationship with every single person he possibly can. And that's why us, the church, this collective of Christ followers on mission with God is so important, that he's placed his strategy in our hands to share with people about Jesus. So let's have patience with God. Why? Because we know he's on the move. He's drawing people through his church to him. And that's why we can have unwavering faith. And that's why, you should vote. But no matter who gets elected and who doesn't, shouldn't shake you, because we're unshakable. And so what I ask from you is this: for you to live out Jesus' number one command, to love God, love each other. Let's be that church. No matter who's elected or not, no matter if you agree with it or not, no matter how uncertainty rises or falls, no matter what someone else around you says to you or doesn't say to you, no matter what someone posts or doesn't post. I'm just saying, our call as Christ followers, if you're a Christ follower, what God is saying to you is, it's about loving people like I have loved you. Our call as Christ followers is to love people. Love them to the arms of Jesus. Love them to the foot of the cross, where they realize that God's grace is enough for them. We have the greatest mission on earth that God's placed in our hands. And the greatest way to accomplish God's mission is to do what he's commanded us to do, is let's love like Jesus. Let's be that church, that gathering of people. That will be the brightest light our communities need. That will be the brightest light that your coworkers need to see. That will be the brightest light that your family needs to see. You just loving like Jesus. Loving like Jesus. Loving like Jesus. Why? Because we know the end of the story. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that we'll be that church, that gathering of people who take your words to heart, to live it out, to obey you, to love. Lord, I just pray with that absolute expectation that we'll be the brightest light in our communities, in our friendship circles, at our jobs, with our families, that we'll just love like your Son has loved us. In your name I pray. Amen.